I'm Ben Data, CEO of Food Maven and a Denver Startup Week co-founder. Denver Startup Week has always been about community. And today, it's more important than ever to show how we can come together to create opportunities out of the challenges that we face. Opportunities for every member of the community. Before we dive in, we want to say a special thank you to our 2020 Denver Startup Week.
We will tell you when
Make it all Denver Startup Week has always to our title sponsors. Downtown Denver Partnership, more important than JP Morgan Chase, how we can Prologis to create opportunities out of the challenges. And our track sponsors who have made all the great content every week today possible. Battery 621 and the public want to say a special thank you to Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Lacewood Tag, Zayo, and Denver Partnership. JP More headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to Wix, all the great content, MAPR
Feel free to wrap up
City and HR, and Kickstarter Plus, Promontory Mortgage, Wilson Coors, Friday Health. Finally, thank you to our partner member sponsors, Zayo and Denver Partnership. JP More headline event sponsors. Thank you for your support at Denver Startup Week.
And we're going to play a video from Zayo and then we're going to go live. Feel free to wrap up. I'm not excited about it.
At Zayo, our fiber fuels global innovation. Everything we do, everything we can imagine. Never in history has innovation happened at such a rapid pace. And all of it depends on bandwidth connectivity. Millions of miles of Zayo's fiber span traveling in unique routes, providing a dense metro footprints, offering next-generation solutions. We didn't just see the future of fiber, we built it, we delivered it. Every millisecond, our fiber is fueling crucial operations, breakthroughs, innovations, for world-class impactful companies that are disrupting the status quo, igniting imagination, revolutionizing industries, and creating brand new ones. Our customers are advancing wireless communication, transforming healthcare, changing education, revolutionizing transportation, redefining banking, powering retail, and upping the game in esports. These innovators rely on Zayo's fast, secure fiber networks to connect their offices, factories, data centers, clouds, exchanges, venues, and more, ultimately fueling innovation and transforming lives. And behind those fiber connections, Zayo is all about these innovations. We take ownership in all fiber. Our employees take the initiative to deliver trusted solutions to every customer and make their experience effortless. We are energetic and entrepreneurial, a partner to rely on. We are Zayo. We are working with our customers on what comes next, constantly anticipating what they need. We are fueling global innovation that is changing the world. We are energetic and entrepreneurial, a partner to rely on. We are Zayo. We are working with our customers on what comes next.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I imagine many of you have already been to a few sessions this week, but if you haven't, welcome to your first. And this is one I've really been looking forward to because at the Downtown Denver Partnership, we love cities. So we're here to talk today about the power of proximity in cities with none other than Padden Guy Murphy. I'm going to start by having you introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Tami. Yeah, my name is Padden. I head up communications and public affairs at REEF Technology, and just super excited to be here with all of you. And I'm a big fan of the Downtown Denver Partnership, and I think we hopefully will be expanding and scaling operations soon in Denver, and we'll hopefully be a proud member of the community.
Thank you for that. So let's kick off with getting an overview of REEF. Can you talk a little bit about the company, the vision, some of its history in terms of what's been accomplished today?
Yeah, absolutely. So at REEF, we say that our mission is to connect the world to your block. So really what that means, kind of unpacking it, about 2 years ago, REEF was just a little startup that raised some venture capital and then acquired actually a number of the largest parking operators in the United States and Canada, and actually then formed what is now the largest parking operator in North America. But we're ultimately not building just a parking company. We see the power of proximity in parking lots and in parking garages, and believe that they can be more than just a place to store cars. So the whole kind of thesis of the company is built around this idea of getting of the power of proximity, the idea that we built our cities over the last 50 years for cars rather than people. But one of the things that's powerful about parking lots and parking garages is that they actually, our entire network actually puts us within proximity of about 70% of Americans. So if you can think of a parking spot, a parking location, and then a network of over 5,000 parking lots and garages as a distributed physical network rather than just one parking lot, you can then say, how do we start to layer on products and services and experiences to actually turn one location into kind of more of a neighborhood hub for a neighborhood, but also the entire network more into a platform for whether you're a restaurant or a grocery or retail or healthcare. We're basically building what we kind of think of as like an app store for real estate.
It's pretty fascinating when you think about building cities. We have all of these building blocks, from streets to sidewalks to buildings. And I really think long term, we haven't really looked at these parking spaces as an epicenter and a hub and a way to connect to all aspects of the city together. So tell me a little bit more about the seed of the idea that launched this, because it's really refreshing for those of us that are involved in city building. What was the impetus?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our co-founders, our founder and CEO, Ari Ojalvo, is an industrial engineer by training. And he basically, he's from Istanbul, went to school in Chicago, grew up in great cities in the United States and around the world. And basically was looking at cities from an efficiency perspective, really. And so the way that we think, again, kind of stepping back and looking at a macro picture, and this is oversimplifying, but if we look at the last, call it, 30 so years, what we see is that we built our lives and we built our cities for cars rather than people, right? And so we built around centralized hubs that then spoke out. And so the way that we built our lives, we commute from our home into a central business district. We work in an office tower. A commercial business district is generally more just office space, and then the neighborhoods are more just for homes. And we left this idea that was always at the heart of cities of building work, live, play, grow environments in cities, and so that every neighborhood is in kind of this enriching sort of idea of a 15-minute city or 15-minute neighborhood where you can do everything but within a 15-minute walk or bike of where you live. But we built this centralized hub and spoke system because of our dependence on cars. And then the way we built the economy that modeled that. And so we look at this in kind of three phases. Basically, the first phase, call it like since the opening of China really in the late 70s, this phase of kind of like factory in a warehouse. So stuff is built manufactured in a factory in East Asia, sold in a warehouse in the United States. And we just called those warehouses things like Target and Walmart and IKEA. But ultimately, we commute to these big box stores. We commute to where we go to work. And it's really this commuting lifestyle. Then the next phase really happened when these things all got invented in 2007, 2010, with the iPhone and the App Store. We got a new operating system, but we still have the same infrastructure. So for the last 10 years, you can get an Amazon package delivered, same day. You can get Uber Eats or Grubhub to deliver something to your door, but we're still using the same infrastructure. So we are literally just having an Amazon truck come from the warehouse and bring it to you, or we use our great restaurants that are built for dining experiences as warehouses essentially. And we have one person at Toyota Prius go pick up a sandwich, drive across town and drop it off. And so that really hasn't made a lot of sense because there are all these externalities of congestion, the cost of carbon, cost of congestion, the real value and cost of a person's time. It's just not, it hasn't been an efficient system because the infrastructure and the operating system weren't met. One was modern and one was the old way. And so we really look at this period, this next decade as the rise of the neighborhood economy in the 15-minute city. And what we saw was that was already happening because people want it. The reason why people love Denver, right, is because of the work, live, play, grow environments, the ability that you can live your full life within your neighborhoods. And everyone can feel the problems of our great cities that are growing because of traffic and congestion and sprawl. And so these trends were already accelerating, and then COVID hit and the world basically just stopped. And for hundreds of thousands of horrible things about COVID and horrifying things, but one thing that is a that it gave us was a moment to when we, for the first time really since 1945, that we're all inside our homes, that we can ask ourselves, what did we just build, and what do we want to build? What should our cities look like? How should we shape them? How should we organize our lives? Does it make sense that we commute? The average American commutes almost 2 hours a day, every single day. You don't move to Denver to commute. You move to Denver to live in Denver, right? And so what we think is really an opportunity is all of those things that were already being driven by community organizations, and really with the return and rise of the downtowns as mixed use and work, live, play, grow environments. That's now just accelerating. And there are a lot of questions around how do you make sure that cities can thrive? How do you think about transforming real estate in smart ways? How do you make sure it's equitable and inclusive? And so obviously us thinking about the infrastructure of parking lots and garages, that's one piece of it, but we do think it's like a pretty important piece, because it's this amazing asset that we have in our communities that was just hiding in plain sight.
It is hiding in plain sight. When you think about the consumer, the resident of a city, talk a little bit about, from a practical standpoint, what could look different to them?
Yeah, so kind of we think in terms of our business, we really think in kind of a phased approach. We're a really young company still, so we think in terms of pilots, projects, and then product. So first step is that we're proving pilot use cases, of showing that you can actually run real businesses in a micro kind of modular mobile sort of way. So we'll come back to that in just a second. Once we prove that out, then we start building at a project by project basis, a little bit more focused within a targeted, call it 10 strategic cities, of which Denver certainly is on the list. And then finally, how do you actually then productize that? So we're thinking of our distributed real estate network not as just a bunch of parking lots, but a true network. And how do you build a digital platform so that whether you are a local kind of mom and pop restaurant that says, hey, I want to build up my delivery only capacity for my restaurant across the city, or you're a kid with an idea to scale urban farming across the country. You want to be basically the app store for real estate. So today what that looks like is we started with what we call neighborhood kitchens. So people call it ghost kitchens, dark kitchens. And the idea there basically is if your favorite restaurant in Denver used to be distributing all of its delivery from one storefront, the idea of REEF is through our neighborhood kitchens, we can actually have delivery only kitchens that take up about 3 parking spots, but can actually have 6 restaurants running out of them together. So it's highly efficient. But importantly, then you can be delivering from maybe 25 restaurants across the city. And so we have today about 100 neighborhood kitchens across about 20 cities today. Then when COVID hit, we this wasn't on our immediate roadmap, but obviously COVID was not on anyone's immediate roadmap, but healthcare specifically wasn't on our immediate roadmap. But we kind of had in maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years, wouldn't it be cool if we could, put pop-up clinics, but micro kind of shipping container sized clinics around the country. But then COVID hit, and we just basically said in a nonprofit capacity, how can we just basically mobilize our spaces and we have 15,000 team members, everything from parking lot attendants, valets, really logistics professionals. So we teamed up with a few leading companies, BioReference, Carbon Health, a number of state and city and county governments, and started helping deploy COVID testing. And so now that's actually transitioning into our partnership with Carbon Health. We just announced the intention to basically launch about 100 what we're calling pop-up clinics in cities all over the country. And so today it's about COVID testing, but you can imagine if maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now, you look at what used to be a parking lot, and now you can imagine kind of thinking just they'll all be designed differently, but think about shipping containers, just because maybe it's successful for folks, because we've seen stuff like that. Shipping container sort of markets where you might have for delivery, pickup, and in real life experiences, restaurants, retail experiences, healthcare, basically a thriving marketplace that is an open air environment. And so that's part of the stuff that is obviously, there's a huge amount of demand for that right now. We're really focused mostly on the delivery side of the business, delivery, grocery delivery for restaurants, but we're transitioning to those in real life experiences as well, this idea of a full neighborhood hub.
So you said right now it's about testing, but I'm thinking it's going to be about vaccinations.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that our kind of hope is that we basically I've been at the company for about a year. And so when I heard about REEF, I was, really, really excited because, so you and I obviously met in past life when I was at WeWork for a number of years. And WeWork and REEF are different companies, different spaces, but similar sort of intention of this. There's a generation of startups and nonprofits that are thinking, how do we make more walkable cities? How do we kind of be helpful to create community and kind of reimagine the urban landscape? And so when I heard about REEF, I was really excited because and when I met the team, because basically the hope for REEF is that we can basically build the infrastructure and the app store, right? And so you're right, it starts with COVID testing because that's what's needed today. But if you ask the same question, if you have a curious kind of mind and you say, the same way that we say, why do we commute for 2 hours every day? Why, for instance, why can't we eat out on the street? Like we can now, like why couldn't we always do that, right? And there's just these legacy decisions that we have an opportunity that I think urbanists and a lot of people who are, urban planners and developers have been asking for a long time. But now every single person can ask the question, look at a rooftop and say, why do we give the best kind of views of our cities to parked cars on top of parking garages? And so the same thing can be asked of, I'm in Bozeman, Montana. I consider Denver like the second best city in the West after Bozeman, Montana. But so my wife and I moved back. We have a kid on the way the beginning of November. So we just set up a kind of crib situation back there. You can see my little panda and pig.
I love that you're sitting in front of a crib.
Yeah. Well, I love it right now too. It's a very quiet situation. I imagine by mid-November, it's going to be a noisier environment. But to your point, like it starts with that. It starts with testing, but ultimately, like if we think about how did we used to go to the doctor, and our CEO Ari asked the question a lot. It's like, why can you get a Starbucks around the corner, no matter where you are, but you can't get access to affordable healthcare? And so we have that same sort of mission and vision. But meanwhile, folks like Carbon Health, that's literally their mission. And so that aligned kind of vision and shared opportunity together. We come together. You start with kind of testing, then you think about vaccines, but also flu shots, preventive healthcare, just basic wellness checkups. The opportunity is basically endless. The question is, what can you do if you kind of like, when I was growing up, there's always the saying, at least around here, think outside the box. Right now we're like, think inside the box. Like what can you actually, anything that you could put in a shipping container that could transform a neighborhood and be beautiful, right? From restaurants to grocery to urban farming to healthcare, little pop-up retail experiences. It's endless, basically.
Yeah, and my mind is spinning about all of the incredibly cool ways that we can collaborate. And I imagine many of our listeners and others involved in Startup Week have all types of ways in which they could drive their business through the platform that you're creating.
Yeah, and that's our hope, right? And so as we're building it out today, it's really on a lot of this stuff is serendipitous, right? Particularly because I think the relationships that you can build out of networking events, pre-COVID, like Denver Startup Week, and now even in a digital format, there's a sense of urgency and opportunity. I think that startup founders, leaders of corporations, nonprofit leaders, in a way of the people, I think, with the exception of pretty daring kind of founders, a lot of people kind of thought about within what is the universe of the possible, and a hospital should exist in a hospital. And now all of a sudden, with COVID, New York City announced basically we're giving 100 miles of street back to people and bicycles, right? People are putting restaurants out on an open street. And so we can just start to ask the question. One of my favorite quotes is this Bernard Shaw quote. I learned it as an RFK quote, but it's actually Bernard Shaw quote. Some see the way things are and ask why. Some dream of things that never were and ask why not. I think what's exciting about the energy that's happening inside of communities that has been accelerating in places like Denver and the startup community in Denver, but in cities around the world, there's all of a sudden this just urgency and this kind of a potential for collective action to say, let's dream bigger. Let's build our neighborhoods and build our cities as we envision them. And so I think the opportunity is huge, and people can just reach out, by the way, you can send an email to padden.murphy@reeftechnology.com and hop on the
Here,
call.
let's pop that into the chat. Can you repeat that? And we'll have it.
Yeah, my email is just Padden, Padden, .Murphy, Murphy, @reeftechnology.com. I'd also say that we have a proud son of Colorado, I think he might be listening in, Gordon Bronson, who leads urban innovation and social impact on our team. He's just gordon.bronson at reeftechnology.com. So we are, we're really excited to team up with, the communities and change makers within communities to just ask the question, like, what should we, these parking locations, garages and lots, some are owned privately, some are owned by the cities, but ultimately, whether you're a landlord or you're a mayor or just someone who lives in a community, we're all kind of recognizing the same thing, which is, in the short term, we're not going to transition away from cars overnight. And so parking lots, as we transition towards micromobility and shared use mobility, they serve an important purpose still from a mobility and parking perspective. And we're working on technology to make that more efficient, make it smarter. But we all look at these structures and say, imagine this isn't a parking lot, it's a canvas. And what should we paint on it together?
Well, it takes a village to build a city. So all of the entrepreneurs out there thinking about what they might like to start or how to expand their business, one great way is to invest in the way we're building the city. And that leads me to another question. You're obviously committed to cities and you believe in them, as does your company. So we often hear everyone's going to flee cities. These times have changed. People don't want density. Talk to me about that.
Yeah.
Because, I have very strong opinions about that.
Yeah. It's interesting. So look, I'm a guy from Montana. I grew up in a city called Great Falls, Montana. It's about 50,000 people. I grew up in the downtown area. Could walk to my Paris Gibson Park, walk to what was called Central Avenue. There's this great hot dog place called the Beer Baron. We'd walk down and get some baseball cards, stop in, bug my dad, who ran a couple of restaurants. And like, that was my experience of what Montana was. And so like, it never really occurred to me, but later I lived in Salt Lake, but I went to school in Boston and in the UK. I spent a bunch of time in cities in China. I spent a bunch of time in San Francisco and DC and New York. And it didn't occur to me until a couple of years ago, someone asked me, like, you're from Montana, why are you so obsessed with cities? And the thing is, and this isn't our term, the mayor of Paris really kind of coined and has championed this idea of the 15-minute city. But ultimately, the thing that all of those places where I have lived that had a richness and a community to them is just this idea that within a 15-minute walk or bike ride, I lived in a village. I lived in a thriving neighborhood that had everything we needed. So we moved. So by the way, I'm in Bozeman, Montana now, right? But like, I moved from Williamsburg. I'm 4 blocks away from Main Street in Bozeman, Montana. It's not that much different, frankly, than Williamsburg and Brooklyn. And so we actually, when we talk about, we're committed to cities and we believe in cities. But if you think, let's use New York as an example. We actually believe that the commercial business districts that were primarily places that were towering workspaces and then some retail on the bottom, we believe in those places too. We believe that they're going to become there'll be more housing there. Like I'm projecting on my own beliefs a little bit, but you will still need offices. They will be distributed. I think there will be more flexibility in a post-vaccine environment. But the idea that you commute every single day into the same place, it's over. The commute is dead. And so I think what that means is that we will convert a lot. Good news, by the way, we're going to have some availability of real estate and we have a bunch of need for housing in great cities like Denver, New York City, San Francisco. So I think that the commercial business districts will be more work, live, play environments. And then like kind of the outer, I live in the outer borough in Brooklyn, which was mostly, there's less work there, but it was about housing and retail and restaurants. There'll be more work there. And then the suburbs as well. The reality is, a suburb can be just as good as the thriving epicenter of walkable little neighborhood, whether it's Hayes Valley.
Almost as good.
I think there's just work to be done, right? Like because the question I think that someone told me once, like, how do you know if a neighborhood is a good neighborhood or designed well? And I was like kind of describing things about my normal life. I was like, it's much easier than that. Just close your eyes and imagine that a mom and a dad and a kid are walking down the street. Is it safe? Is it actually interesting and enjoyable? And if you close your eyes and you think about commercial business districts that have no housing, it doesn't feel right. There's missing a human element. And you think about about suburbs that did not have retail and kind of some greater density and mixed use. you sometimes, you can just be walking essentially in the middle of a highway or an endless cul-de-sacs that don't have kind of that street life that when we think of what makes a city great, it's because that's why we're so focused on neighborhoods. It's actually about the richness of the neighborhood, because in your ability, whether you live in New York City or Denver, your kind of sphere of influence is about how far can you walk within 15 minutes, right? And or, you know, our lives kind of center around where we lived and then 15 minutes around where we worked. I think those are just coming together, and it frankly will save us a lot of life and time. Because if you think about the fact that the average American commutes for 2 hours every day, just the loss of human potential is massive. The loss of activity, of being able, we're constantly moving but never moving. I think so many people move to Denver because it's such an active lifestyle and healthy, and you can move around. But if you also just think about the human capital waste is enormous. If every day, the 2 hours you could use, coming up with new ideas with folks in the, Denver Startup Week community, it's like, it's compounding. And then of course, from a carbon perspective, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to move people around so much.
Well, we're strong believers in the future of cities. Throughout history, whether there have been pandemics or wars, ultimately people fought to stay in the cities or quickly return to the cities. And that's why I think the work you're doing is so important. This continuous innovation with this game board of our cities is important, and it really sets the stage for the future. So kudos to that. Let me talk a little bit about how entrepreneurs can learn from some of the work that you're doing.
Sure.
You talked about your pilot project product. Did I get that right?
Yep.
I really think that the framework that you've laid out in terms of how you systemically work your way through what you implement is valuable to companies of all sizes. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also any other key learnings in terms of how you operate or bring new ideas to the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. And there's a, So we use kind of this idea of pilot project product. In past life, we work very similar. We thought in terms of like incubate, launch, and scale. I think what's really important is when you're in a startup, it's we have a mission and we have a vision of what the world ought to be. And then as you navigate and try to figure out how to actually build a product, there's product market fit that you have to establish, but there's also just an understanding of how to actually create, where you are in the process of development. And so for us, end state, we see the ability of like, if Tami, you say, hey, there's someone who's in the Denver startup community who wants to scale, organic. It's a Denver-based organic pet food supplier, and they want to scale basically micro kind of organic pet supplies and grooming services across the REEF network. Ideally, you'd be able to go to a digital platform, kind of fill that out, onboard immediately, kind of test your own concept, and as it works, then you can seamlessly scale across in the same way that with an app store, people will download the app. Today, where we're at is we're kind of we're still in the experimentation and visioning stage to prove the proof of concept. So, like for us, where we start, and there's two examples, the neighborhood kitchens we are building internally by ourselves. Our partnership with Carbon Health is a partnership. And so we're really we're facilitating them as they lead, and we're building the physical product together and scaling. But both are very similar process, which is we start kind of in one city or maybe three, or one neighborhood or maybe three. You basically deploy a minimum viable product. It might not be beautiful, but it works. And then we figure out the operations, figure out what works, what doesn't work. And once you kind of have that out, then you launch kind of another cliff, maybe 10 more locations so that you can kind of break the thing to fix it and rebuild. And so that kind of process of, testing, iterating, it's a process really of having like deep conviction that's loosely held kind of in stages, because we kind of have to align, be like, all right, this is the thing we're going to build and test and kind of over the next 2 week sprint. We use a terminology around sprints. We're going to try to achieve X, Y, and Z. In this month, we're going to try to achieve X, Y, and Z. In this quarter, we're going to try to achieve X, Y, and Z. And then you sprint against that, test it out, learn, and then based on what you've learned, you iterate and test again. And then once you kind of have it humming, you have your processes up and and running, then you get a little bit more kind of daring, and you say, okay, we're going to launch to 100 cities, and that's when you have to build up those teams. But I would say from a startup perspective, we are now like kind of, it's interesting is REEF as a company is a later stage startup, but we have younger startups within it. But as an example, with Carbon, it's a very similar thing. Carbon definitely has a vision of where the future of healthcare is going. But the first step is to find there's immediate need where we can be useful, basically. And like for any startup, if you are basically solving a problem that hurts a business or hurts a person, then you probably have product market fit. If you are creating something that feeds a dream or an aspiration of a business or a person, you're probably going to find product market fit. And so we started with clear community need, whereas COVID testing. And now to your point, it's like, all right, now let's think about vaccines. How are we going to scale? How could we be helpful in scaling that distribution? With flu vaccines, flu still coming around every year. We have to do that. But then ultimately, like longer term, in my CVS in Brooklyn, where I live, it was a classic CVS. I walked in and there's there's a convenience store on the top half of it. It's Cheetos and water and energy drinks and everything else. And then you go down an escalator to where all of the kind of the pharmacy is and all of the actual like convenience goods for your health. But you have to ask the question, this is pre-COVID, right? But like, why were we sending people who were going down to get their medication? Maybe they're older folks. We're sending them down in the same place, down an escalator, where people with the flu are going to get flu medicine. It just does, if you think about it, you're like, why did we do that? And so one of these moments that I think COVID just kind of like has opened up so many eyes is, why did we create centralized hub and spoke systems when we should have many, many hubs and many spokes? And then why did we create all these choke points? And the reality is that before the world was digitized, we had to. If you want to work, we all have to be in the same room, right? And so we don't have to do that anymore because of things like Zoom and Slack and WeWork. Before, if you were thinking purely from a health perspective, you want to cluster all those opportunities in the same place. Otherwise, it's a nightmare for a person. You have to look up in the yellow pages where to go. Like it's just
yellow pages,
right? Like and then that's the reality. Is that's why we built that way. And now I think we have this moment where we say, like, not only can we build differently and better, but we have to. We just have to. We're running out of time from a climate perspective, from an inclusion and opportunity perspective in cities. Cities are the greatest gift of economic opportunity that humanity has ever invented. And we invented them because it's baked in us. We need each other and we seek each other out. And by being clustered around each other, we share ideas, we build things, then other companies are able to build things next to us. It's everything that your work facilitates. And that's what makes cities great. And we have to save them. And the opportunity is not to say, to me, it's not, are people going to leave, New York? New York's fine, right? Like people like me, I'm having a kid. That was going to happen anyway, right? Like I was going to get back to Montana and figure it out anyway. But the reality is my littlest sister is trying to figure out how to get to New York, right? Because she's 10 years younger than me and she's in a different point. And Richard Florida talks about these like family formation moments. And so those moments are happening. But at the end of the day, those kind of, those patterns, those migration patterns between cities into the suburbs that people are paying attention to, it's missing the actual larger tidal wave of urbanization. And the reality is it's not about New York or San Francisco or even Denver. It's about having not just 10 cities, it's about having 1,000 thriving cities. And what I always found really fascinating about Denver, and what I love about Denver is a city like Bozeman looks at New York and is like, any city looks at New York and is like, New York is New York. Like you can't see yourself in that. But Denver is in this interesting sort of, as a brand of a city, it's like an Airbnb. Like the big cities are like, like I was just watching last night, there's on the show, The Circus on Showtime, they're highlighting Colorado and Denver's kind of vote from home infrastructure and how good the government is and how advanced it is and all this. And so even big cities look at Denver and say, oh, wow, that's great. They're innovative. And the little cities look at Denver and say, oh, we think that we could be like Denver, right? And so now we have this moment, this conference is a perfect example of this. I don't think the future is that we are all stuck at home working from home by ourselves. But I do think what it means is that the social capital that used to be created only within Denver or only within New York City, it's fluid now. And Denver and Bozeman and New York City are neighborhoods of each other now, digital neighborhoods. And that is the most powerful thing I think that we can possibly unlock, because what it means is that a startup within Denver finally truly has the opportunity to access talent literally all over the world and pull talent to Denver, but also finally to access markets, I think, in a nearly seamless way, because it's not about just individual one location proximity, it's about network proximity. And so if you know that you can if you can drop in into a city if you need to, and work with a certain group if you need to, or you can do a Zoom call if you need to, or if you're scaling your business, you know you can turn a key and basically scale your healthcare company through REEF in neighborhoods across the country. You don't have to have such kind of a 20th century view of one city and then everyone else. So to me, that's very exciting, because I think what you'll see is a lot of a whole new generation of startups in kind of these rise of the rest cities. And I think Denver will be a driving innovator from both the big cities and kind of legacy leading cities, superstar cities, and then also for kind of the cities that are rising and learning, and that ability to learn from each other's kind of success of how do you create innovation clusters, how did Downtown Denver Partnership create that cluster, other cities can copy it, but also I imagine there will be many downtown Denvers over the next year. Like the success of one, begets the success of others. To me, is what's exciting.
Well, and Denver's always had to punch above its weight class. We were in the middle of the country. It wasn't that easy to get here. And so I think everything that Denver did to build this city was consistently to build a place that people would come. And that really required the combination of public investment, private investment, and truly a bridging of nonprofit, public sector, and private sector. In the work that you're doing, you do have to deal with government officials and cities, I would imagine. Can you talk a little bit about how that works, where you've seen success, where you've seen challenges? Because for many of our entrepreneurs, as they launch companies that deal with government, that can be a very complex and kind of overwhelming place. They don't know where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say is for us, like what we essentially, we look at a parking lot and say, and the fun thing about this is that everyone, I think, who lives in cities, big ones and small ones, you look at a parking lot and you've said to yourself, oh man, imagine if on the roof of that parking garage there's a beer garden or a basketball court or a restaurant. Like we've all done that, right? Like what if we kind of playing that game of what if? And so every single city, every single neighborhood, the job of going to mayor's offices and chambers of commerce and downtown partnerships and EDCs is basically, we're just very straightforward. Like we have this network, we want to be able to make the actual core parking business much more efficient, much technologically driven and smarter. And then for our space, we want to have just basically use higher and better use that actually enriches the community. What should we do here? And we haven't had a single conversation with a government leader where they don't have an idea of, in New York City, every city right now, like the question of how do you do dining outside, particularly with the winter coming? How do we think about, potentially we start thinking about like things like supply chains and produce. What about rooftop? Everyone, one of the things that's been really exciting to me is almost every single conversation ends up getting to urban farming. I haven't met a person in any city that we work with where they don't go, wouldn't it be cool if we put like an urban farm on one? It's like, yes, that would be cool. And we should do that. Let's do that together. And so I'd say that's step one. Is a good idea is, has many, many fathers and mothers. I think the next step though, is then it's like wait, how do we do this? And because the reality is the way that we generally have permitting structures and zoning structures for real estate. You look at a parking lot, you go, something can be a parking lot or something can be a restaurant, maybe it's a food truck, but what's a neighborhood kitchen? And so it's just a process of building out generally space within the existing permitting infrastructure so that we're partnering with cities and it's making sense, and or we are creating pilot programs, or in many cases, just creating new ordinances so this new kind of class of thing can work. And I think what I would say is my personal view on how to engage with government is always like, and this is just true for my personal motivations, like the fact that I work at REEF is not the first thing about me. The fact of me being a person who loves cities and wants to make them better is why I now work at REEF. And so when you're thinking about how to engage and grow your business, engage with government, you got to think as a citizen first and be like, how do we build an infrastructure and a partnership that actually could not just help me, but also, the 500 restaurants within within a 10-mile radius that are hurting right now because there's different occupancy thresholds because of COVID. And so if you're solving the problems for the community and for other local businesses and stuff, generally that at the end of the day, most folks in government, in my experience, are doing the best they can, often with limited resources, trying to do the best across their constituencies and their communities. And so in my experience, like, you have to go in and partner with government and have some answers to the questions that will be asked. If you try to build, if you're building in any of the spaces that I think are really worth building in, which is future of work, future of cities, food, education, it's just these are sectors and industries that are just intricately tied to the public sector, or at least to public life. And so you have to go and engage with nonprofit and public, semi-public, private organizations and the government itself. But tactically, what I would say is, government leaders are really busy. Find your champion. There's always someone inside of the city who, like, if you're building urban farming, I guarantee there's probably 25 people in the city of Denver government who are fired up about that. There's also probably another couple hundred who have a lot on their plate and think that's cool, but can't focus on it. And so you got to find your champion and engage the way that you would any other partnership. Anyway, that's good
guidance, especially on the champion piece. So I'm taking away a couple of great learnings. Number one, I value your inspirational and passionate commitment to cities, and just encourage all of the individuals participating in this session to really keep that top of mind. How can you make our cities stronger, better, more vibrant? I also want to say the idea of break it so you can fix it, deep convictions loosely held, very important, and then finding your champion. What's that?
I said I stole that one from Ari, our CEO. Like, strong convictions loosely held. Like, that's how you have to engage, I think. Yeah.
And then, the whole idea of the champions. Find your champion. A good lesson in life. How about the last word? What would you like to have our listeners take with them today?
Yeah. So I'd say two quick things: a REEF plug, and then just I have a lot of the people I think probably listening and involved in Denver Startup Week are actually founders themselves. I jokingly refer to myself as like the coward's founder. I always work with founders. I'm not actually one, so I can't give you founder advice. But what I would say is, like, if you are involved in Denver Startup Week, you're doing the right thing. We always talk about, in past life, we always talk about the importance of building community and a tribe of people who also just give a damn. And so I've never met someone who's building a startup who isn't mission driven. Just find other people who care about Denver, people who care about whether it's helping kind of neighborhoods and build cities, or if it's something that I was way out of my depth, and it's about this entire COVID moment may have just kind of pissed you off or enlightened you about what it's like to have digital education, or how our how our pharmaceutical processes work, and like, go solve that. And I'd say that the best advice that I would imagine everyone who takes part in these panels could probably give is, like, everyone's just making it up as they go. Like, if you there is no answer, right? And so, like, if you believe the world ought to be a certain way, or you believe that you have vision for something that you think could be better, just go and start doing it. Because there is no advice other than just, like, get to work and be humble, have strong convictions, start building. And then once you realize that your assumptions were wrong, just iterate, change. And then, quick plug for REEF, what I'd say is, we're really, really, first, any startup out there that is kind of whether you're healthcare or, like I said, urban farming or retail, if you can see value in a distributed real estate network and a platform that you could bring product, services, or experiences to cities, reach out to us. But specifically, I would say to people who are plugged into the restaurant community, we are actively trying to bring on and help local restaurants and cities across the country to help them not to compete with their existing brick and mortar restaurant, but basically to extend what their delivery and digital operations are. So by all means, go check out neighborhoodkitchens.com or go to reeftechnology.com, and our door, digital door, so to speak, is always open.
Great. And one really important final question. You're near the crib. I imagine there's some great little baby toys back there.
Yeah.
Do you want to share one of your favorites?
Yeah. So actually, so I'll bring you into to our world right now. So the only toys we have right now are this little pig and panda bear. But what we've actually committed to, we have a whole stack over there, and this might be, I might end up regretting this, but in kind of lieu of saying it's 2020 and looking at climate change and how can we kind of change our behavior and lifestyle to be more sustainable, we've committed to cloth-based diapers, and every single parent I've talked to has said, that's really cute. So we're going to see, we can probably do a Zoom together around late November and see how much we're regretting that decision. But yeah, we have no idea what we're doing. So
I commend you for that. I'm going to put it right up there with my kid won't have a cell phone until they're a teenager.
Yeah.
My kid won't play video games, and no video games with violence.
Yeah.
Those are all aspirational notions. No, I think it's a great step, and it's noble, and it does make a difference. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you today. I love what REEF is doing. I think it's inspiring. Cool things ahead. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tami. I really appreciate it.